Hey everybody, this PowerPoint and narration is on Chapter 4, and I've chosen to address the two educational psychologists that are prominently mentioned in this chapter, Erickson and Kohlberg, on psychosocial development. You have the book's PowerPoint. It's 42 pages long. You'll be grateful that I didn't narrate that. There's quite a bit in this chapter, including a section on relationships, psychosocial development, which I'm going to address, and also moral development, which I'm going to address, social competence and aggression. So it's going to be important for you to look at all five of those sort of big topics, but I wanted to emphasize Erickson and Kohlberg in this PowerPoint. Okay, so Erickson provides us with what he called developmental turning points. So there are 8 of these. And page 120 in your text provides you with a nice overview of that. And they're listed here for you. The ones that we're going to look at specifically are the ones that affect K through 12 schools, and that would be 3, initiative versus guilt for preschool, 4, competence versus incompetence, elementary school, and then 5, identity versus role confusion for middle and high school. Then we're briefly going to take a look at 7 on generativity, which applies to a teaching career. So developing initiative in preschool, and this is that initiative versus guilt. This is the capacity to use a surplus of energy to plan and carry out a task. Children in preschool explore objects, they draw, they pretend, they make things. They're very curious, and they often test the limits that teachers impose on them. This is typical of preschoolers. They're just very energetic beings. They're very curious beings. They want to just explore and touch and feel and practice and pretend. But the teacher's role in this age group is to provide directions for that energy. So not to stifle the energy, but to sort of direct it and provide direction for them. So you have to be able to nurture initiative, but also communicate classroom rules and limits. The problem comes when teachers suppress preschoolers' curiosity. Children develop guilt, hesitation, and they tend to give up on initiative in order to comply. So we get compliant beings, but they're not developing that initiative to be curious and to look at the world around them and to try out new roles and try out new things. It's a very, very delicate developmental stage in children's lives, because if they're stifled or suppressed at this age, it's very difficult to overcome that as they move on. The second one is developing competence. This is particularly part of elementary school, and this is where students are developing competence. And competence is the self-assurance that one can successfully accomplish culturally valued tasks. So believing in oneself, that one can do something. And it's also understanding a work ethic, understanding that trying hard and experiencing the pleasure of a job well done. Oftentimes we see elementary students not develop that work ethic, and it becomes very problematic as they continue to mature up into adulthood. So this is the time when students really have to learn that work ethic. They have to understand that may have to work hard at something, but in doing so, they experience great pleasure in completing that task well. So positive feedback with challenging tasks begins to develop this enduring sense of competence and mastery. Well, that doesn't mean positive behavior, positive feedback on every single thing they do. There has to be some critical feedback as well. But if the critical feedback outweighs the positive feedback, then again, it begins to sort of suppress students' self-esteem, but also begins to suppress their ability to develop a competence in any particular task. So a teacher's task at this point is to offer students developmentally appropriate challenge. This is key, folks. Too often we ask students to do things that is beyond their developmental ability, and this results in frustration. It results in a feeling of non-efficacy, a feeling of not being able to do something. And students will give up very quickly. Why should I bother to do it? I never do it right. I can't do it. So it's a very delicate balance here for a teacher to sort of push students, but push them in a developmentally appropriate way. Okay? And to offer positive and authentic feedback. Okay, and authentic is so important. Kids can see right through us if we're offering a sort of lip service to them. So it has to be authentic feedback. And we have to engage in conversations about the relationship between perseverance and the pleasure of work, going back to that work ethic, helping students to develop a work ethic. And we have to remember that academic lessons can't just be academic lessons. They are always embedded in a subtext of developing confidence. So it's very important for elementary teachers to understand that it's not just a matter of teaching kids stuff. It's teaching them how to become competent and valued members of society. Developing identity is generally associated with middle and high school, and I think that any of us who have had teenagers or worked with teenagers will understand this quite well. This is where students are finding something to do and someone to be. It's a time of great exploration and experimentation, and we have to be careful to sort of guide that exploration and experimentation within control parameters without stifling, again, without creating a place where students are not able to explore. We know that experimentation can be hazardous sometimes, so we have to be careful about being vigilant about what kids are experimenting with. So identity is the sense of being this distinct and productive individual within the larger social framework. When adolescents search for and find and commit to a set of adult roles and ideological beliefs, they develop a sense of identity. This doesn't happen overnight. This takes a great deal of trying on a bunch of different hats and thinking about who one wants to be. I think about my own teenagers and the various roles they took on and trying to find their place in the world and who they wanted to be. It's really a fascinating time as long as there's good guidance along the way. So at this point, the teacher's task is to create classroom opportunities where students can explore and test their aspirations, their personal beliefs, their possible future selves, and conceivable occupations through academic curricula. And this can be done through literature, through history, through mathematics, through experimentation in science, through art, in everything. So keeping in mind that at this point, students are really searching for an identity by providing them vehicles through academic means to explore those identities. A teacher is doing a great service to the children. One thing, though, a teacher has to be is open, to change, because a child can be, or a teenager can be, sort of in one role, identity at 1 minute, and the next minute be somewhere else. So there has to be this openness to change, and the idea that students are developing, they're experimenting, they're learning about themselves. So if they don't do this, they suffer from a role confusion and a sense of uncertainty about themselves in the future. And all teenagers have this sort of uncertainty about, what am I going to do when I grow up? I think even adults have that, what am I going to do when I grow up sort of thing. It's always sort of looming in the future. But it's not so much just being an occupation, but what it is to be in the world. So there are 4 identity statuses that emerge as our adolescents start developing their identity. First, there's the diffused identity. This is where an adolescent has not searched, explored, or committed to adult roles, sort of just like, I don't want to do this, I'm not ready for this, and so exploration and commitment are low. It may be they're not developmentally ready to pursue this. It may be that they're sort of resisting it. A foreclosed identity is when an adolescent just assumes somebody else's ideology. They don't do any exploring. They just commit to adult roles that others have had. Often this happens when students assume the values of parents. I used to see this often in political ideology, where students would adopt their parents' beliefs, and it took them a while to sort of step outside that role and look at what they believed in rather than what their parents believed in. Moratorium is where adolescent has explored but has not yet committed to adult roles. And this is the infamous identity crisis, where they're looking and looking and looking and looking, they're exploring, they're experimenting, but they can't seem to commit to a set of ideological principles. And then an achieved identity is where an adolescent that actively explores and makes personal commitments to a way of life. And on page 124 in your textbook, there's a nice little graphic that shows the percentages of middle, high school, and college-age students who are in these four statuses. And it's very interesting, so do take a look at that. And then I want to look a bit at developing generativity. This is in a teaching career. This is adulthood. And this is the sense of being productive in one's work and in looking after and guiding others. It's an active concern for the growth of self and other, a sense of responsibility for sharing skills and knowledge. And this just encapsulates what a successful teaching career is. Feeling productive. When a teacher stops feeling productive or stops being concerned for the growth of him or herself and others, or stops feeling they have a responsibility for sharing, that teacher becomes stagnant and isn't a very good teacher. So continuing to develop generativity is important, and continuing to nurture that and foster that is important in a teaching career, or in any career as far as that goes. Because this is educational psychology, I choose that to look at. But even if you're not going to teaching, if you're going into social work or library science or any other kind of work, the idea of being productive and continuing to learn is vitally important. But there's got to be a sense of tension too. So psychosocial, I'm having a hard time saying that word, I apologize. Psychosocial development you don't want to eliminate all those traces of the sort of opposite side of what we're looking for, because the goal is to develop more trust than mistrust, more initiative than guilt, and so forth and so on. But there has to be a healthy system of checks and balances. So you've got to have a conscience. Initiative needs a conscience to keep it in check. You've got to have a certain amount of guilt. And identity needs a healthy skepticism. They have to have a certain amount of confusion. So it's not one or the other. It's this healthy tension between the two sides of the stages. And then we look at Kohlberg's stages of moral development. Kohlberg hypothesizes 3 stages. The pre-conventional stage is where a person doesn't understand social conventions. What is right or wrong is what avoids punishment. And moral judgments are based on what satisfies one's own needs. So really very egocentric. Conventional is when a person begins to understand and use the principles. So a person values living up to the expectations of others, and being good means what doing others approve of. It's what gains you their approval. It's what pleases them. And moral judgments are always based on law and order, like doing one's duty, following fixed rules, maintaining the social order. The third is post-conventional, and this is where a person understands and embraces moral principles, but instead of just accepting the social order, the individual embraces or adopts his or her own perspective. So it doesn't mean living outside the social order, but it means finding one's own moral compass and living one's own beliefs. What is right is what a person is determined to be right. And the moral rules are created from a critical examination and, if necessary, a revision of those rules to meet the needs of society. It's self-chosen ethical principles like justice, equal rights, respecting fairness, reciprocity. These are very high order stages of moral development. And post-conventional reasoning is rare in schools and even in adulthood. Adults tend to follow the second stage of conventional, where one does one's duty, one follows the fixed rules, and one maintains the social order. Questioning the social order and choosing one's own moral compass and choosing to live by that moral compass is rare indeed. It does happen, but oftentimes people tend to be ostracized for not living within the law and order orientation. So that's it, folks. I just wanted to briefly go through these two, the high points of these two psychologists. They're very important to educational psychology in theory and in constructing the ways in which our schools operate and the ways in which our teachers teach. So that's it. Thank you.